right, welcome everyone. So glad that you're joining us today for the Dashboard Dojo. I am just fresh back from a beautiful resort on the New Hampshire coast. It was really quite something being up there as the wind was whipping up the waves and all that. I know some of you have had some pretty terrible weather. So today we're going to talk about formulas for reporting. And again, really glad you've joined us. If you haven't set up your dev org, you can still take a few minutes to do that. And the link is right here on the page, just a simple bit.ly link that explains 2 steps to set up the dev org. All right, so what are we going to do today in the dojo? So we'll have everyone who wants to finish setting up their dev orgs. I'll just introduce myself. We'll talk about taking advantage of Spring 21. So the Spring 21 release just went live this past weekend. The releases are scheduled over 3 weekends. So some of you might have been upgraded back in January, but just thought to talk to you about that. Then we'll get into Waza and Shiai, which are techniques and practice. We'll talk about some upcoming dojo topics. In fact, the next 2 are also formula related. Just thought to indulge in formulas. They're just so super valuable. We'll talk about some OpFocus training events, and then we'll get to Q&A. All right, so once again, you're setting up your dev org. Just 2 steps if you haven't done it yet. And I'm going to start the clock on my phone, which I didn't think to do a minute ago. Look at that. Great. And I'll show the slide one more time in case, I mean, you've got the link and you can see the instructions. All right, so very quickly, who am I? So my name is David Carnes. I'm the founder, chairman, and chief evangelist of OpFocus. 8-time Salesforce certified. I'm a platform champion. I've been a platform champion for the last couple of years, formerly called Lightning Champions. And I thought to share that I remembered about the Kenka Matsuri, which is in October every year in the city in Japan that I lived in. And they take these unbelievably beautiful portable shrines and they bash them into each other. So I have never been more drunk before noon. It was really just very special. Each of the neighborhoods in the city have a shrine and have one of these portable shrines that they then bash together. It's really quite amazing and violent and cool at the same time. So I mentioned OpFocus. We're based in the US and Canada. We're a Gold Salesforce partner, and we work with SaaS companies on revenue operations. So I mentioned Spring 21. The release is live, and the release notes are there under releasenotes.docs.salesforce.com. There are a couple of pages of release notes related to analytics in each release, so it's worth taking a peek to stay up to date on new features. So for today's session, we're going to focus on formulas. I can't think of any topic more meaningful than formulas for somebody who's trying to get the most out of Salesforce reports and dashboards. So we're going to talk about some use cases. I'll actually ask if anyone wants to share some use cases that they've, interesting problems that they've solved. We'll just go right down to basics. I know some of you are new to formula writing. We'll talk about what is a formula. We'll talk about the types of formulas, data types, functions, and operators, which are really important to understand when working with formulas. Then we'll get into the 3 kinds of formulas that we can create on reports: row-level formulas, summary formulas, and cross-block formulas. And a cross-block is essentially a summary formula that only lives on a joined report. So it is a summary formula, but it's slightly different, and it appears different when you work with them. But it allows us to do math across blocks, to do interesting things across blocks on joined reports. Finally, we'll talk about the old reliable standby. So, you know, when I was a boy working in Salesforce, really what we had was custom formula fields and summary formulas. And so most of the time we required an admin to help us out and write a formula field on an object. Now, whether we put that field on a page layout or not, we could choose, but then we could go ahead and use it in reporting. They are still very useful in reporting, so we don't want to omit them, even though we have row-level formulas, summary formulas, and cross-block formulas to talk about. All right, so looks like we've got a good group today, and So just one last call out for anybody who wants to set up your dev org in 2 easy steps. I'm sorry for the issues with the Trailhead Data Manager some of you have experienced. It looks like mine ran okay. That is not a good answer for people that are having problems refreshing the DTC data. So for today's session, it won't matter. I apologize for the issues you're having. I don't control Trailhead's Data Manager tool or this data set. So I'm not always aware of issues and why the issues appear, but it looks like it ran fine on my my machine. So that's a terrible answer when somebody has a problem. Sorry about that. All right, so I thought, before we get started, to just ask if any of you would like to raise your hand and share any examples where you've successfully used formulas in reporting. I've got some examples down below. I'd love to hear if you have any that you'd like to share. One key one, a great example that we'll look at today for summary formulas is a simple win ratio. So out of all the deals that are won or lost, what percentage did a sales rep win, or what percentage did we win in a particular industry? Another use case, one that used to have more value in the olden days, is concatenating values. It's still super useful, but in the olden days on a dashboard, a table could only have 2 columns. And so we would often create a formula field that would concatenate a bunch of other columns into one column and then show that as the leftmost column on a dashboard table. Well, now in Lightning, a Lightning table can have 10 columns. So we don't really quite have to do that for that use case anymore, but it's still very valuable. And we'll do an example of concatenating values. Another example is changing a data type, and it could be from pick list to text or from date time to date. Every now and then we need to change the data type from one data type to another to solve some issue in reporting. Somebody had an interesting one recently that they asked about, which was they wanted to use the months on an opportunity close date for a dashboard filter, and we had to do some finagling using a formula, a row level formula, to get the data in the format that would be accessible by a dashboard filter. Does anybody have any that they might like to share? I think the last few times we had sessions, we had people with more willing to share. So if you raise your hands, you can come off mute and share. All right, let's not worry about it. Let's just keep going. Oh, looks like Michelle raised her hand. How's it going, Michelle? Where are you?
I'm doing well. I'm in Chapel Hill, North Carolina.
Great. Is it cold there?
It's a little chilly. It's about 50, which is, relatively normal for us right now. We're not getting the cold yet that everybody else is getting.
Yeah, so better than the 9 degrees in Austin, Texas.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
All right. Where have you used a formula to solve a problem in reporting?
So I recently had to do a report where I needed to have the quota by day. So I took the entire quota and then I had to figure out like the beginning of our fiscal year and then subtract today's date and then, figure out the number of days.
Oh, okay. So how many days into so if we're on day 100 of the year, it'd be, a little less than a third.
Right. And then how much of what percentage of the quota is that? So
that's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah. I might actually ask you, we're going to do 2 more sessions in the dojo on formulas. And in the third one, I'll look for people to submit and share cool stuff they've done. I think that's an awesome example. Okay. And it's interesting how far you could take that, because you could go crazy with it and remove weekends. And I mean, not that it matters because they're spread evenly throughout the year, but anyone else? Thank you for sharing. Anyone else have? Sure. Looks like Prasanna might have raised. How's it going, Prasanna?
Hey, hi. Thanks, Carnes. I've been trying to. Hope you can hear me.
Yes.
I'm from Toronto, and in fact, I was to join this session. In the past, I tried some of the times and not okay, but I'm glad I'm able to connect with you. So I'm administrator working for an organization here in Toronto, and I have a 4X certified. In prime time, looking forward on the forecasting aspects of where the formulas can be, where the needs are quite different from one organization to the other. If you can throw some light on formulas in terms of forecasting, because out of the box, they have limited way how you can use the forecasting tab. So if
okay, and all right, well, thank you so much. And it sounds like the sound was going in and out, and maybe somebody was banging a drum in the background. So sorry.
Sorry about that. Sorry about that.
That's okay. So we won't cover forecasting formulas today, but that could be one that we touch in on the third session, which will be on March 24th. And I'm definitely open to requests and samples that people want to share. Why don't we keep going? There are so many interesting use cases for formulas, but let's just set the stage. Let's start at the beginning, and then we'll get deeper and deeper into the pool. So what is a formula? Great place to start, right? A formula is an algorithm that derives its value from other fields, expressions, or values. Formulas can help you automatically calculate the value of a field based on other fields. So when you write a formula, we use an Excel-like syntax. It's very much like Excel. If you have formula writing chops in Excel, you're going to do great in Salesforce. If you want formula skills in Excel, it's not a bad place to start within Salesforce, though there are other things we can do in Excel, and the formulas can be more complex in Excel. But basically, a formula is made up of literal values. And you can see here, I've got a few examples. This is a formula that takes the close date of an opportunity, and regardless of when the close date is, it shifts the date to the last day of that month in that same year. And we have some literal values in here like 12, 12, 31, plus 1, 1, and minus 1. We also include field references when we write formulas. And you can see I've got the same field referenced 4 times here. Now that's, just one example. You could reference many fields in the same formula. But in this case, I just happen to use the same field over and over, and that's the one shown in blue, the close date. We can also leverage functions, and there are over 80 functions available in Salesforce. So 2 examples of functions. Here's one here, the length function that can be used with text. And if you put a field in there, or even just a text value within the parentheses of the length function, it'll tell you how many characters long it is. We can use that to determine whether a text is null. In fact, if the length is 0. There are other functions like or. In here, we have some functions. There's a month function that's giving us the actual month of the close date, and it's giving it in a number. We have a couple of other functions that are basically creating. The date function allows you to concatenate a bunch of stuff and manufacture a date. In this case, I'm manufacturing 12/31 of the current year. So there's a whole list of functions. We're going to talk about them in a minute. We also take advantage of operators. You're familiar with these from just basic math, but there are other ones like not equals to, concatenate, which is the ampersand, equals, plus, minus, the math. One other thing that a lot of people don't realize with formulas is that we can embed comments into the formulas. And this can be useful for 2 ways. One, to just make notes about your formulas within your formulas. Another use case is when you're troubleshooting an issue with a formula, you can actually comment out a section. So within the slash asterisk blah blah, that's commented out, and then we end the comment with an asterisk slash. So this function over here is basically saying, hey, whatever the date you give me, I'm going to spit back the last day of that month in that same year. And you can see the example here that I've got February 17th, and the formula is spitting back February 28th. And we can tell that this is a formula by the FX next to the column name. November 1st is spitting back November 30th. So just one simple example. And this function, this formula here is starting with an if function. And it says, if the month is 12, if it's December, then we know it's going to be 12/31 of that year. Otherwise, the magic in this particular formula is that we're taking the first day of the next month and then subtracting a day from it. And this allows us to get to a 228, which with the computer can always figure out the leap years and stuff, but we have a harder time writing formulas to do that. So in this case, I would take the close date and I would say, you know what, take that month, February, add a month, go to the first day of the month, and then subtract a day. So this is obviously a little bit more interesting of an example. I don't want you to start sweating because I'm giving you a challenging example, but just as an example, this is sort of a useful thing you might solve with a formula.
And David, somebody asked a question, do comments count against the character count for a formula field?
I believe they do, but we could check that when we get in, do a hands-on exercise. I believe they do. All right, so some types of formulas used in reporting. We basically have 3 plus 3 that appear on the report itself, plus the custom formula fields. So row level formulas, summary formulas, cross-block formulas, which are usable in joined reports, and custom formula fields, which an admin creates on an object. So we might go to the case object and create a custom formula field, save it. We don't have to put it on a page layout, but we can absolutely use it in reporting. In the enterprise edition of Salesforce, you have 500 custom fields per object. As a report writer, you should feel absolutely entitled to use a few, 1 or more of those. It's not a problem if you create a custom formula field, don't even put it on a layout, and just use it to solve a problem in reporting. We do it all the time. So another reason to learn formulas is that they're used all over the place. So they're used in default field values, assignment and auto response rules, escalation rules, validation rules, workflow rules, process builder. I'm assuming flow as well. I don't know why I didn't put flow on there. Approval processes, custom buttons. I mean, they're really used all over the place in Salesforce. This is an awesome skill set for any person, including admins, to learn. So just to review these 4 types quickly, and I thought this grid would be helpful for just sort of understanding your choices. So a row level formula, when you're creating a report, sort of the most basic option is a row level formula, and it applies to a single record at a time. And when we create a row level formula, the output types available to us are numbers, dates, date time, and text. I vaguely recall something like if you have multi-currency enabled, you can't use currency as an option, and that sometimes aggravates people. There are 39 functions that are visibly available when you create a row level formula, though in fact, I think I tweeted out this morning or tomorrow it'll go out that, not all the formulas that are usable are sort of clickable within the function editor. For whatever reason, there are more functions that are available. So a summary formula, the output types can be numbers, percents, or currencies. We have a smaller number of functions available to us, but we start getting into some interesting functions like parent group val and prev group val. And we'll talk about those in the next Dōjō session, but really, really cool functions. So in order to create a summary formula, you require a group. We then evaluate the groups within the formulas, and we can do math. We can calculate percentages and stuff like that. There are also some interesting things like unique that we can use. We can reference the row counts, et cetera, within summary formulas. Cross-block formulas, as I mentioned earlier, are only available in joined reports, and they work just like summary formulas, except that we can reach across blocks on a joined report and do interesting math across the blocks. Finally, the custom formula field, we have the most output data types available to us. And so every now and then, rather than creating a row level, a summary, or a cross block, we'll just think back, oh, I really want the output of this to be a pure checkbox. So you might go to the object or ask an admin to go to an object and create a checkbox formula field. We also have the most functions available to us when using custom formula, when creating a custom formula field. There are some things to consider. Someone had mentioned the number of typed characters. We're only allowed to type 3,900 typed characters. There is a complexity limit, and that's something you're going to hit usually sooner than you'd ever hit the 3,900 typed characters. Sort of an interesting thing, the output of a formula, the max is 1,300 characters for what the output can be. So you can write a formula that does a bunch of calculations, but the output is limited to 1,300. I've never hit that before either. I've certainly hit the 5,000 complexity, but I've never hit the 3,900 or the 1,300 limits. One other huge reason to look at custom formula fields is cross objects. And we can reach across up to 10 objects, pull back a value, and use it within our formula in interesting ways. All right. So I mentioned data types. There's a page in help, and I've got a bit.ly link here for this formula data types. And it's just helpful to just read within help, what are these data types? Like, how does a percent differ from a number? So I won't spend a lot of time on this, but it is good to know that there are additional data types. The time one was added pretty recently. So over the years, Salesforce has sort of deposited, as the releases have gone by, has deposited additional data types available for our use. The real heavy lifting in formula writing is with functions. And a function is a predefined formula that performs calculations using specific values in a particular order. I want you to think Swiss Army knife, and not the wimpy Swiss Army knife. I want you to think the big, complicated Swiss Army knife that's too big to fit in your pocket, that has like scissors and tweezers and stuff. Like, this is so incredibly useful in Salesforce as it is in Excel to know this one thing, like how functions work. So there are over 80 total functions available in Salesforce. And this bit.ly link down here will actually give you the full list with a definition for each one. And if you click on any one of them, it'll actually give you syntax to use for each one. So the syntax is really an important thing. And you can see here that this bit of help is telling me that the date value function, it's date value and then open paren, close paren, and then within that you put something, an expression. Typically that might be a field that you're evaluating for date value. So it replaces the expression with a date time or a text value, merge field or expression. And that's what this particular function does. There's so many of them and they're so interesting, and there are more of them that you realize that can help solve problems. I'm going to show you an example of the longest formula I ever wrote, and it was too big for Salesforce's limit. And I found a text function called upper that saved the day. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. So with functions, my suggestion is to beg, borrow, and steal. This link here on bit.ly is so helpful because you get a list of all the functions in the system. And if you click on the and function, for example, it's going to give you samples. And these samples are really good. So for the if function, I think there are 3 or 4 samples, and including, like, I love this. Whoever wrote this, I want to give them a high five, because a 5 nested if example, that's the kind of example I want as a formula writer. That's a really complex, even though this is the stupidest formula ever, because there, you know, if every town and city in the country had a tax rate, or in Canada had a tax rate that was different, you know, we would max out on the, you know, you wouldn't use this as a real example, but it's still meaningful because it's 5 nested ifs. All right, so a couple of functions that I find really helpful. One of them is the text function. This one was added probably 6, 7, 8 years ago. And it allows us to convert a value to text. And this is great for extracting the value out of a pick list. I think a lot of people get started working with formulas and they bump up against a pick list and they struggle with how to work with it and they get errors. Well, the text function, when you're working with a pick list, there are at least three options. There's an old function called isPickVal, which will allow you to extract the value out of a pick list. The text function does it in an easier way. You could also do it with the case function. The case function is another really good one. It checks an expression against a series of values. So this is how we used to do bucketing in the olden days before Salesforce added bucket columns to reports. We would use a custom formula field with a case function. And we would say, if industry equals agriculture, then we'd say cool, you know, something like that. You basically run through a long list and you might distill it down to a couple of values using the case function. So I mentioned if. This is probably the one that does the heaviest lifting, super valuable. So if logical test, if it's true, do this, comma, if it's false, do that. And you can embed the ifs one within another up to some complexity limit. Contains function allows you to check for text within text. That's super helpful. The isBlank function was also added in the last, I don't know, 7 or 8 or 9 years. And it's essentially a way to check for nullness. And it replaces, in the olden days, we used to use the length function for a text field. And if it was 0, that was considered null. And we used isNull for dates and numbers. Those functions are still available and still in use in systems, but isBlank sort of solves all three with one. So just thought to share a few examples. The last topic before we dive into some examples are operators. So these are expressions. So expressions can be joined to one another using operators. So if you have a field such as the owner name and you have a field such as the owner mobile phone number, and you want to put them in the output of a formula, you can use an operator such as a concatenate operator to essentially combine them. Otherwise, the syntax, you'll get an error. We can also use operators for math. We can use it for exponentiation. Never actually said that before. We can include parentheses. We've got equals, not equal to. There are 2 ways to do not equals, less than, greater than, or bang. So exclamation equals is also equal to not equal. So this is helpful to know that you have different ways of combining. And kind of an interesting thing, when you create a custom field, this is the list of operators you see. And when you're on a report modifying a row level formula, a summary formula, or a cross-block formula, this is the wimpy little list of operators that you see. Now, believe it or not, you can actually use these other operators. For whatever reason, they got tired after creating 7 buttons and sort of gave up. And maybe it was just too much for people to see not equals and less than and stuff like that. But you can still use them on the on report formulas that we create. So there's another. It's the same bit.ly link up at the top. It has the list of all the operators and then links to definitions and examples of each one. All right, so when you're creating a report, a formula on a report, you use this thing called the formula editor. This was upgraded in the last 1.5 years, maybe something like that. Maybe it's almost 2 years, 1.5 years. So when Salesforce introduced row level formulas, this was upgraded across row level formulas, summary formulas, and the cross block formulas. And I think this is really nice, this formula editor. So you've got 2 tabs over here on the left. You've got a list of fields you can pick. You've got a list of functions. You give it your formula name. You choose your formula output type, if you want decimals, if they're applicable here. And then you have 2 subtabs where all the magic happens. This is a cross-block formula. So this one, I went right to the deep end of the pool. And this one is, we'll see an example of this later, just a more complex one. But you can actually write a formula without writing any code. So you can use fields here. In fact, I will always select a field from the left and use the insert button. The odds are good that you're going to mistype formula names or field names. So you might as well use the insert. You also have the list of functions here available, and you've got the buttons for your operators. So you can actually build a formula without actually typing, which is kind of nice. You also have a validate button here. This validate button does half of the work of testing. It just checks the syntax. It just means syntactically, is the grammar okay in what you wrote? It doesn't actually test whether your formula does what you want it to do. Okay, that's the other part of the testing that you're going to have to do. But on the display tab, you can specify the display level, and this is important on summary formulas and cross-block formulas. Perhaps when you have multiple groupings, you want to say where you want that summary output to appear, and that you control on the display tab. All right, so before we get started on we'll do one last topic here, testing formulas. My strong suggestion is that you devise your test cases for formulas before you start writing formula code. So you think about what you want this formula to do, such as that allocation date example that I gave earlier. I want, anytime there's a close date, I want to take the last day of that month in the same year. Okay, great. So that's what I want it to do. So how am I going to test that? Well, a really nice way to test it is on a report to use any of the input columns, put them side by side, and put it right next to your formula. So that's what I've done here. I only have one input, which is the close date. And then what I did is I actually sorted this, and I can just go through, and I might have thousands of records, but it's a nice way to just look for any anomalies. But it looks like this is working correctly, and we could scroll and confirm that it's working correctly. So I mentioned the validate or check syntax. It's called two different things. That button, it okays the grammar essentially. I strongly suggest testing with records, like I mentioned, displaying the input columns right next to the formula output. And then also you could use comments when you're testing. All right, let's get started with an example. I want to get you guys in the system. So let's evaluate individual records on a report with a row level formula. So you can have up to one row level formula per report. This works with text, date, time, and pick list fields. These are great for aging or other date calculations. If you need to modify a data type, you could do concatenation. You could flag an anomaly using this. Just like, let's say you have 10,000 cases and you're looking for ones that have this and this and this, and you want to just flag it. You could use a row level formula for that. Kind of a cool thing to know is that you can stack some of these features. So if you create a row level formula, you can use it in grouping, you can use it in filters, you can use it in summary formulas. So when you start combining these, this is where you start getting into the really good advanced stuff. So row level formulas cannot be used in bucket columns or cross filters. So let's go do an example together. So this example is pretty simple. We're going to concatenate case owner and priority, and we're going to use it in grouping a report. So what I'd like you to do, and we'll do this together, we'll go to the reports tab. We're going to create a new report on cases, and we're going to call it, we're going to create the report. And we're going to add a row level column called owner priority. And we're just going to concatenate two fields, the owner field and the priority field. Now to get at the priority, because it's a pick list, we're going to use a function called text to extract that value of the priority. And then we're going to concatenate them together, and we're going to put a colon and a space in between. So we're going to use ampersand. It's probably a little small on the screen here. Kyle's going to paste it into the chat. So if we go into our system and go to the reports tab, if you want to follow along or just watch, either one's fine. So we're going to go to customer support reports, and we'll choose cases. And I'm not going to do anything to this report. I'm just not even going to bother doing anything else other than going right to adding a row level formula. So we'll go to the columns here, and we'll choose add row level formula. So the column action drop down to the right of the word columns. We'll add row level formula. And we're going to call this owner priority. And we're going to do the output type of text. And we're going to paste in that thing that Kyle just put into the chat. And I have right here. Now why don't I actually show you what before just pasting it all in. So we're going to grab the case owner. So I could literally just select case owner, click insert to put my owner in there. Now this is a good enough function. This is a good enough formula on its own. I could just use this. Oh, I see what I did. So I could just put in the I could replicate the case owner. That's what I've done here. But if I go back and now double click on it, I can add another field. So if I add the priority just by itself and I try to validate that, I'm going to get an error because Salesforce doesn't know what to do with this. So basically, this is where we start needing to have a function involved because priority is a text field. Sorry, it's pick list field. We're going to need the text function to extract it. So what I could do now is I could go to functions and I could scroll down to the text function. Oh, isn't that funny? They didn't include this. So this is an example of, this is great. Originally, when they created row level formulas, they didn't include pick list values. I complained, and they were wonderfully receptive, and they included the ability to use pick list values, but not some of the functions that would help us. But we can still use the function. So if I do owner type, and then re-include my priority field. Now notice what we also can do. Well, if you choose to do typing, you see that you've got the type ahead capabilities, and that's really powerful. Now this is still going to throw an error the way that I've written this, because it doesn't know what to do with two fields right next to each other without some kind of an operator. So now I'm going to go back in and throw that operator into the middle, and I'm going to put two operators, in fact. The ampersand is the first operator, and then I'm going to put quote, colon, space, quote, on another space and an ampersand. So I'm essentially going to concatenate the owner and the text of the priority and put a colon and a space in the middle. So we'll go ahead and click apply. And you can see here that that owner, colon, space, and the priority is appearing here. Now we can go one step further if we wanted to. We can use this in a grouping. So now that I've got my formula field here, you see the FX on the left. If I drag this up and don't drop it on top of add group, just below add group, and you can see the blue section appear. And I can now group by this new row level formula that I just created, if that's helpful to me. All right, so that's a row level formula example. There are many great examples out there. You know, for calculating dates, how old is something, how long since something has happened. If you have time stamping or date stamping of opportunities as they move stage to stage, you could do math based on, if you have a qualification date and a closed won date, you could do the math between them and use a row level formula for that. All right, let's keep going. So summary formula. These allow us to summarize at a grouping, or a grand total level. We can sum, min, max, or average. Unlike a row level formula, summary formulas can have up to 5 per report. Now, the interesting thing about this is that you can have up to 5 per report, but they can't reference each other. Now, 100 years ago when I took the admin exam, that was a question. How many could you have? How many summary formulas could you have? And can they reference each other? And the answer is no, they can't reference each other. You can have up to 5 per report. So these are great for, you know, doing math, summing, averaging. What was the biggest deal we sold in the last year? Stuff like that. You can use a max. We could do a calculation for that. Now we can also use the output of a summary formula in a chart or a conditional formatting. We cannot use these in filters or in buckets. That doesn't work, but we can use them in charts and conditional formatting. Now to add a summary formula, what we do is we first add a grouping. So we create a report, add a grouping on something such as opportunity owner. And then we go to the down arrow and we choose add summary formula. And that same formula editor appears. And we can then work with that. They're a little different. It's a little different on a summary formula versus a row level formula, but we write our formula, we validate it, and then it adds it as a column over to the right, and then we can go test it and make sure it works the way we want. So to practice the summary formula, we're going to do a really great, simple, this is a legendary example, how to calculate a win ratio. So for all the deals we've won or lost ever, what's the percent that we've won by, and in this case, we'll group it on industry. So let's go in and do this one together. So we'll create a new report on the reports tab. So from the reports tab, we'll click new report and we'll choose opportunities. So when we create a new report on opportunities, if you see opportunities up here in the oval, you know you're on the right report type. I've had a mantra for a long time, filters first. It's kind of nice to just take a quick peek at the filters. So in this case, I want to ensure that we have the most data possible for this analysis. So once we create our new report, we click on the filters tab here. Let's choose close date and change it from current fiscal quarter to all time. And then we're going to do one more change. We're going to say the opportunity status, and we're just going to say closed. Now, closed, interestingly, means won or lost, either one. And that's all we want to see for this analysis. We don't want to see open opportunities, and I can explain why in a minute. Okay, so we created our report on opportunities. We went to the filters tab. We changed the close date range to all time, and we changed the opportunity status to closed. And then back on the outline, let's add our first grouping. So if you don't add a grouping, add summary formula is grayed out. So let's add our first grouping on industry. Now that we've added a grouping, we can add our first summary formula. So let's go ahead and do that. So once you've added a grouping on the industry, let's choose add summary formula. Let's call this win ratio. Now, when you type in win ratio for the name, right below it, you have the formula output type. You could leave it at number, but why don't we make it %, because that's interesting. Now, this is a very, very simple formula. We're going to click on the 1 over on the fields menu on the left-hand side, WON 1, and we're going to insert the sum. Now, I could insert the average, min, max, or unique, which is kind of cool. So we also have the ability to do uniques here. I'm not going to do that. That might apply more to an amount column or something else. The 1 is literally just a count of the number of won deals. It's a row count. So we're going to do one sum, and we're going to use the divided by operator, the slash, and we're going to do the closed, and then select closed, insert that sum. So it's the one sum slash the closed sum. Now I could just type this, but I'm superstitious. I've made 1,000 mistakes over the years. I've just learned when there's a field picker, use the field picker. It's going to save you some headaches. If I go ahead and click validate now, this is telling me this is a valid, formula. If I go up to display, just to point out that you do have this control here on display where you could say, you know what, I don't want this to be at all summary levels. I just want it at the grand total, or I just want it to appear at specific groups. Now, keep in mind on a summary report, you can have groupings at 3 levels. And this is where this starts to get interesting, that we can be really specific about where we want this math to appear. So you could have another grouping of like new business versus old business, but only do it at the industry level, even though you're grouping at multiple levels. Let's just leave it at all summary levels. Let's click apply. Now this is kind of hard to look at. There's just too many columns here. I'm going to just show you that the win ratio is added way over here on the right. An easier way to see this is to actually collapse the report and to toggle off the detail rows. So whoop. Now keep in mind, when you toggle off the detail rows and we look at this, there's only 20 records. We're in a preview. I know that there are 700 total records in the system. There are probably a couple hundred that are won or lost. So I tend not to trust what's in the preview pane. I want to go see the real data. I'm going to go ahead and run this. And now we're seeing the real data for agriculture, apparel, biotech, et cetera. And I've left in the record counts in there. So that's an example of a summary formula. Keep in mind, you can have up to 5 of them. We will often use multiple summary formulas if we're doing the math, if we're trying to measure the velocity of deals through the pipeline from qualified to closed won, from qualified to closed lost. We might have date stamps for each stage, and then we do the math between stages, and we do the math in a summary formula for each one of those things we want to measure, like qualified to closed won, qualified to proposal, qualified to closed lost. That would be 3 different summary formulas we might create. Now, the other thing you could do, you could add a chart to this. You could also do conditional formatting. So just like any other grouped report, you have the conditional formatting option. We could add a conditional formatting rule. We could do it based on the win ratio output. We could say, you know what, if it's less than or equal to 75%, they're in trouble. If it's over 90%, it's green. Click done, click apply, and boom, we see the data appear conditionally highlighted. So that's available to the formula output as well. I do want to mention quickly cross-block formulas. These, as I mentioned earlier, they only appear on joined reports. We can summarize at the grouping or the grand total level. We can sum, min, max, average. I think we can do uniques here as well. I need to add that to my slides. I believe that we can have up to 50 of these per report, so up to 10 per block, which sounds like a crazy number. But this allows us to calculate across blocks. So we're not going to do a hands-on with this one, but I do want to mention kind of a cool example for this. So in this case, just here on the screen, I've got an example of calculating a projected amount. So what if we multiplied a rep's win percentage by their open pipeline amount and did it on the same report? Well, we can do that if we create a joined report and we have one report block on the last year opportunities, everything they've won or lost, and we can see the win percentage here. Now, if we make this a joined report and we add another block showing their open pipeline, we can then add once we've grouped cross block, we can add a cross block summary formula. And you can see that here, the projected amount from the win percentage. And we've just literally taken that 75% times the 21 million in the open pipeline, and we're calculating 16 million of open pipe. Now you can do interesting things like put that on a scatter plot like this example here, just to show you one more level of detail for how this works. This is actually the formula itself, and you think there's no way I'm ever going to remember how to write that. Well, you actually don't have to. Just like we did before, when we create the joined report, add the second block, add our grouping across the blocks, we can then create the cross-block formula and give it a name, projected amount 1. Like here, the output type, we could choose currency. And then if we use, just like we did before, these left-hand, the field menu and insert values, it's going to automatically, so B0 refers to block 0, which in an array is the first item in the array. So the first block is this one here. So we're taking the block 0 1 sum divided by the block 0 closed sum. That's just the same thing we just did a minute ago here. And then we're multiplying it times the amount sum of block 1, which is this sum of the amount here. So within this one column, we're replicating our win rate and we're multiplying it by the open pipeline. And you don't have to write the B0s and stuff. It's going to do it automatically for you as you create this.
And David, I just wanted to let you know that we're at almost 11:50, just as a quick time check.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. All right. So the fourth option with creating formulas for reports, this is the old standby. This is the most powerful, is actually creating an underlying formula field. So I'm thrilled with all the progress of the formula writing capabilities within row level formulas, summary formulas, cross-block formulas. But the old standby that's always available to us is to have an admin create a custom formula field on the underlying object that does what we need it to do. I've done this for creating really complex filters. I've done this for really complex things, calculations I want to do. I've also done it to use what's called a cross-object formula. And you can grab a value up through a lookup or a master detail relationship from an object up to 10 objects away. It's essentially flattening the database. So normally on a Salesforce report with a report type, you have 3 or 4 objects. This will let you reach across up to 10 objects, grab a value, and then use it in your formula. So there are more functions that are available. There's lots of help. There are 2 tabs when you create a custom formula field. I basically always use the advanced formula tab, and Salesforce remembers that's what you want to use. The simple formula tab is the default tab. It just lets you do very, very basic math. So I just sort of always use the advanced formula tab. There are lots of examples. When you click on this advanced formula tab, you have an insert field button. I always use that religiously. You have an insert operator button, which you can use that full list of operators. And then you have the list of functions over here on the right. You can select one, it gives you the syntax, and then there's a help for this function link where it gives you that page and help with all those great examples. Was there a question, Kyle?
Yes, Monica asked, any tips For working filtering with multi-value pick list, I've been creating checkbox formulas for each value or a text field that strings the selections together.
Okay, so Monica, so you've touched upon the taboo topic of multi-select pick lists, which some others in the Salesforce community have sworn at and stuff like that. I think we'll have to keep that topic for one of the next two dojos where we dig a little deeper into formulas because they are complex to work with. So you've hit the problem head on. So I will come up with a couple of examples, workarounds for working with multi-select pick lists. I'm sorry that I don't have any content ready for that today. Just one very, very quick example to show you. So we won't do this exercise, but I'll just explain it and I'll show you it. Sales reps are sometimes the cause of a case, right? They overpromised. They said, oh yeah, sure, the product does this. And then you buy it and it's like, wait a minute, this doesn't do that at all. Well, we can get back at the sales rep by creating a field that concatenates the account owner's, the sales rep's first name and their email address or their mobile phone number. You could also put this in a report for management to go yell at the sales rep if that's helpful. And the way to do this is to go to the under setup. So an admin would go under setup, go to the object manager, go to the object in question, such as case, go to fields and relationships, and then create a formula field. In this case, the output is text, and we're saying the account owner first name. So I'm on the case and I'm reaching across to the account owner object, grabbing the owner's first name, pulling that in, and then I'm concatenating it with space dash space, and you can see it in the screenshot here, and then the account owner email. So bringing that in, and I've got that example all ready to go here. So in my Dojo stuff folder, where is it? Cases with sales. So this is the report output of that column. And you can see that we have somebody, so this isn't the case owner, it's the associated account owner. So Doroth space dash space, and then trailhead 15 at example.com. So under the hood, the way that this was created, if we go under setup, object manager, we'll go to the case object. There we go. We'll go to fields and relationships. So this is normally where we would create the new custom formula field. Just to show you what it looks like to create one, you click the new button and you choose formula. I'm not going to do that now because I've already created one, and I'm going to just scroll down to it. It's called sales rep contact info. So this isn't in your system, but it's in mine because I just was tinkering. And we can see the formula that I created here. So the field is called, I just called it sales rep contact info. The formula return type is text. And then what I did is I used this insert field button to go ahead and select, and this is reaching across the object and going and grabbing, maybe if I want to add the mobile phone number, that would really get them, wouldn't it? If I get the account owner, so from the case to the account owner, and grab their mobile phone number. So I'm just modifying the one that I just showed you before, and maybe we'll just add a concatenate operator, a colon space, and then I had already added that field, so I'll go ahead and check the syntax. And it tells me that there's no errors. The other thing when you use this check syntax, it tells you the compiled size. This is where you can tell if you're getting up to the 5,000 complexity limit. I wish they used a different word than characters, but characters in this case is the unit of complexity, not the number of typed characters, it's the complexity size. So if I go ahead and save this and we go back to our case report, and if I rerun it, oh, you know what? You see the colon and a space, but none of these user records have mobile phone numbers. So it's doing what we said it would do, but there's no data. Sorry about that. All right. So this is an example from probably 2007 of a custom formula field on the lead object. This predates Pardot and all the other great tools that we have these days. And it was just a simple way of doing lead grading. And this is the top of the formula. This is the middle of the formula. This is the bottom of the formula. It's too tall to list in one go. This maxed out the complexity limit. And you can see here I've got this big outer and then a big outer if, and then an and, within that an or, and so on. I have not created anything this complicated in many, many years, but basically this whole big first thing is determining whether it's an A. And then this next section is determining whether it's a B. This next section is determining whether it's a C, and so on. This probably took me a day to figure out, and I kept bumping up against the limit. And this is where I discovered this wonderful little function called the upper function that allowed me, so the contains function is text case sensitive. So I needed to take what somebody put as their title, make it all uppercase, and then compare that using the contains function against directors and VPs and whatnot. So I don't suggest trying this at home, but this one took a lot of sweat to get this one working. All right, so for a recap, we have just put our toe in the water for formulas. We have 2 more sessions. This is why I set up 3 sessions, to just lay the groundwork for writing formulas and reports, and then getting to the next 2 sections. So what we did today, we talked about some formula use cases. We introduced what is a formula, the types of formulas, data types, functions, operators, and then we went through a simple example of row level formula summary, crosswalk, and a custom formula field. So this is all pretty quick, but it's setting the stage for the next 2 sessions, March 4th and March 24th. But in the meantime, there are 3 trailhead badges. There's one called project called Evaluate Report Data with Formulas. There's one called Advanced Formulas. There's one called Formulas and Validations. These are all good, hands-on, at least the first 2. Oh, no, the project should be hands-on as well. These are all good examples for working with formulas. I mentioned March 4th and March 24th. We have the Formulas for Reporting Part 2. And that will be a bit more hands-on now that we've covered all the basics. And then in the part 3, what I'm hoping is that I might crowdsource. If you have some cool things that you've done, please share them with me. I'd love to include them. And you can register at dashboarddojo.com for these. These 2 examples here, this is using PrevGroup Val. We'll talk about this in the next section. This is one of my favorite functions that allows us to compare these 2 sums, these 2 groupings, and then determine the delta between them. And then we could do something like a percentage change. This example over here is using parent group val, which is another super cool and very helpful function. And what we're doing here is the 17% is this 82 into 388, I believe. It's either that or it's 60 into 345. I guess I didn't look under the hood to see which math. But if we looked at the formula, we could tell right away. I am teaching 2 classes coming up all next week. I'm teaching the OpFocus 5-day admin class. And then March 9th and 10th, I'll do a 2-day workshop on reports and dashboards, touching every feature across 2 days, a little bit slower of a session. All right, so we have approximately 1 minute. Kyle, what do we have for questions?
So Chris asks if you have an additional definition or description for the difference between characters and complexity.
Oh, great question. I really wish that Salesforce Salesforce has this nasty habit of reusing what I would consider reserved words. So complexity is the combination of functions and fields that you're including. Usually it's the functions that increase the complexity limit. Like in Excel, there's some outer limit to the number of nested if statements that you can put in a single formula in Excel. In Salesforce, it's a smaller amount of complexity within a formula. That example from a few slides ago, this is right up against the limit of complexity of a custom formula field up to the 5,000 complexity limit. And it's all this if multiple nested if statements and statements or statements contain statements that really add to the complexity. This one kept hitting the limit and I had to keep thinking of ways to sort of simplify it, and then I'd hit the limit again, simplify it. Oh, so Jay asked a great question. What are your favorite Salesforce ideas related to formulas that we should upvote? Oh, I'm gonna have to share that in the next session. Jay, I promise I'll do that because there are some good ones out there. All right. Any other last minute questions, Kyle?
Yeah, here's a yes and no one. Is there, can you display images in report formula fields?
Yes, yes. And I tried to include an example today. Something's changed under the hood, but we absolutely can using an image function. We'll do that in the next session. I promise we'll do that in the part 2 session. I'll figure out how the URL works these days to have, you know, and there are output like red, yellow, green flags, red, yellow, green lights and stuff like that. Why don't I do this? We'll take the chat and I'll tweet out answers. We'll download the chat from today. If you're on Twitter, here's my Twitter handle. I'll just look through those at a break later in the day and just tweet out answers to the questions. So thank you guys for spending your lunch hour with me, or your early morning hour, or your early evening hour, depending on what part of the planet that you're in. Guys, we'll see you next time. I hope you can join us March 4th.